when I was really depressed, and I don't know about you, that was even too hard. And so sometimes what I like to say to people is there something that just sparkles a little? Is there something
Yeah.
that, you know what I mean? Like, depending on where we are on our journey, and I like sparkle too because it's also like light, but it's just like it's even a little bit less. So, it could even just be like you were saying, right? That butterfly flitted past us. But I really appreciate so much the similarities in our journey. And it makes me also want to say, like, what came for me from that practice of looking for love, looking for pinpricks of light, looking for tiniest moments that it was almost like I could step into that tiny moment of light to get me to the next tiny moment of light and living. Once I practiced that for a long enough time, something happened where I sort of popped out of all of that me. And I say that with all lovingness to my younger self, but it was very self-conscious, self-centered way of being in the world.
Are you an ambitious leader ready to break through limiting beliefs, align with your purpose, and thrive in your career without sacrificing your well being or postponing your true desires? I'm Diana Ordonez, certified high performance coach and your host. Each week, we'll dive into actionable insights and research based strategies to help you unlock clarity, build unshakable confidence, and take courageous action toward a life of impact and fulfillment. If you're ready to overcome fear, embrace growth, and step boldly into your next level, you're in the right place. Let's create a life filled with courage and purpose together. Welcome back, everybody, to Courage and Purpose. Today, I am joined by Sherry Reichard-Belu. And I am so excited to have her on because she is such a bundle of joy. And so much so that the way I actually first got to know what Sherry's role is at Growth Day was when one day after I was called on for the Q&A during a recertification for my certified high performance coaching program, I had a very touching and special moment for me. And I got to tell Brendon Burchard all about how his program transformed my life during a very difficult time. And this was a very heartfelt moment where I was being very vulnerable and connecting, and I really didn't expect to get to talk to him one-on-one. And when I got home one day, I found a card and this capture of Brendon and I during the Q&A and all the comments that the people on the call had sent in, being so supportive and showing me what a supportive community it is to be a CHPC. And it was just like, it touched me in a big way because that moment could have come and gone and I could have held it in my heart, but not had it documented in this way. And for Sherry to have noticed it and captured it and shared it with me in this beautiful way, and with a handwritten note of her own showing her support, it was so heartwarming to feel that embrace through that thoughtfulness and care and time and effort that went into this. And so Sherry's role at Growth Day is actually Director of Joy. And I think, that's probably the first time I've ever heard a title that unique or special. This one in particular just exudes an energy about it that I wanted to start there, because that is how I felt in this moment, is that you had a very special role to play in capturing the joy of that moment. So tell me about how you got that title and what is your role there and how do you embody it? Obviously, Sherry is also an author and coach herself. And I think that so much of even this role is played out in all the other things that you do. So why don't you tell us more about that?
Well, first of all, I love that. I love that it hit the right spot, which is, what I was aiming for. It's really important to me. And I'm going to speak in general terms because it's both for my job with Growth Day as the Director of Joy, but also in my own work with Simply Celebrate. My book is called Say It Now. So something like what I did for you makes me happy on all the different levels, right? It first and foremost brings me joy because I love to put a frame around a moment and take a little snapshot of a memorable moment. And sometimes it does help to shape it. Like you said, you may have forgotten, or you may not have known that so many people were holding the beauty of that moment with you. I'm really, really fortunate because I do get to spend my entire life celebrating, appreciating, acknowledging, encouraging, and it feels to me as if I'm just getting paid for what I love to do and what I would do anyway, right? So I always like to tell people it's an interesting thing because I was a cheerleader throughout my years of junior high and high school. And I was also really depressed. So I had that kind of curious combination. And we don't have to get into all of that now, but at the beginning of any conversation, I do like to tell people all of this joy came from that combination of so much wanting to love life and also having a lot of anxiety and depression. So it's not as simple as it seems.
Yeah. Oh, I love that you touched on that so early in the call because I know how many people, especially anybody that's going through burnout, going through a major transition, whether it was decided on your own or through a life experience, are struggling to find joy or reconnect with joy. And what you're saying is that the two can be coexisting. You can't have one without the other, right?
Yes. Diana, I love that you brought that up. One of the reasons I think that so many people really cheered you on and offered their love in that moment because you were being very vulnerable and sharing. And I think when we're talking about, like, I always like to say it in the way that grief and celebration are two sides of the same coin. And sharing that grief, of course, none of us wishes to have that or to wish it on anyone else, but it is surprisingly something that connects us in a kind of quiet joy. And we're kind of just launching into sort of the deeper stuff of all this. But for me, again, like I said, I think it's important because I never want people to think like, oh, simply celebrate. Oh, director of joy, she must have just like been born like that because it's not that at all. It's really for me, joy and celebration are practices. And I think it's very important to note that because a lot of times in our society too, right, we see the veneer, but we don't always know what came before all of that.
I love that you call it a practice because it implies that nobody is born knowing how. You have to actually practice it to get better at it. So tell
Yeah.
me about that practice. What does that practice look like? What do you, because the practice implies that it's a skill that you can build, right? So I'm sure a lot of us are wondering, how do we build that skill?
And I'm so glad that we're going here because to me, having deep relationships is a part of the skill. Seeking and creating joy is part of the skill. Being able to train our brains to look for beauty and goodness is part of the skill. They're similar but different skills. I got to a point as a young woman in my 20s where I was really depressed, as in constantly wondering how I could get off this planet. That very, very kind of like, I don't belong here. I had so many voices in my head about what was wrong with me and how I wasn't living up to who I should be. And it was terrible. It was terrible. I know a lot of people have some of that. Some people have a lot of it, that sort of self-hate, self-loathing. But the reason that I'm telling you about that piece is that life gave me one of the most amazing tools that started me on this practice. And it's something I call a love list. And that name came later, but what dropped in for me during that time of deep depression to make lists of specific reasons that I loved people. It started with my mom. It was her birthday. I wanted to do something special for her. I had no idea when that idea dropped in how profoundly it would change me. And in addition, would really change my relationship with my mom and deepen it. But when you're in the process, and the reason I say specific is that's it kind of there's something about the specificity that really anchors it in. Like I could say, "Oh, Diana, you're such a bright light," which is lovely to say, Or I could say, Diana, there's something about the way that when you sit there and you listen, and I feel you starting to shine when things really resonate with you, it makes me feel heard, which is true, right? But it's very different. I feel it more deeply because it's a very personal connection to you. So what happened was I started making those what I call love lists now, because when I was making them, in the process of making them, I realized I wasn't depressed while I was in that process of love. And so it started me, this has been 30 some years now, on a journey. First and foremost, I think that's the first practice was looking for love, right? Looking for what I call pinpricks of light. Maybe I could just tell the quick little story about that.
Tell us about that.
It's a visual that really helps me, which is when I was so depressed, it felt like an iron wall closing in. And I was led to a meditation class. And during one of the focusing on the breath, during one of the in breaths, I always remember this. There was just this voice, a kind voice for once, that said, I don't want to kill myself. Like it was the first time that that sort of mantra of like, I want off this planet, I want off this planet was broken. And that was like a tiny little pinprick of light in that wall. And I always think of that visual because one little pinprick of light really changes everything because it offers the hope and the expectation, even there could be more, right? Like that's what happened for me. That's why I call them pinpricks of light. They could be the tiniest of moments, but it's like they turn me away from the depression and to a sense of hope or possibility or love. And I like the visual. I'm so grateful. At the time, of course, it was so super, super, just like with you, right? You're going through stuff. It's so hard. But in retrospect, that was a big gift to me because my life, I was doing it this morning. I consciously say I woke up super crabby. Don't know why, but I did. And I just said, where's the light? Where's a pinprick of light? What's a pinprick of light? And you just gather them. Oh, look at that little baby over there. When I went to dance class, there was a tiny baby, jumping, or, there was a dog that like brought her ball over to me to throw. The song came on that I really, really love, and tiny little moments. And so I love to offer that. And I'm grateful that you gave me the chance because it's a practice anyone can do anywhere, doesn't cost anything. And
Yeah.
it does work.
Yeah. I mean, all of that resonates so deeply for me. You've been very vulnerable to share your story. And I don't know if I've ever quite shared that part of my journey on the podcast before. There were many years, probably most of my life. I've talked about my social anxiety a lot, but I don't think I've ever mentioned, or if I've mentioned it, I definitely haven't gone into it, my depression. And I don't think I've ever thought about it this way either, is that, so much of, until you said it, so much of my life, I wanted to like disappear and I wanted to take my life. And then COVID happened and my late husband got sick and then he died. And it was almost like, I remember the thought that kept going over and over in my head was, it should have been me. He was a better person than I was. He should be here. It was interesting because I spent so much of my life thinking about how to not be here. And then the person that I loved the most wasn't. And then it was like, I have to find the way to recognize that he loved life and he can't live it anymore. And I get to live it. And so how do I live this life in a way that treats it like a gift? Because that's what it was. I don't know if I ever maybe looked at it that way. I definitely know that 2 years prior, in 2018, his two best friends passed. It was the first time that I actually suddenly in a tragic accident, like nobody was expecting that. It was one day on their way to work, right? So it just really made me realize, oh, I could go anytime. Anybody could go anytime, but I could really not be there tomorrow for my daughter of no choice of my own in a car accident on my way to work, had that been me, how would I feel about the way I've been living? And it changed my world around in a way that maybe I didn't fully understand, because I know I had been in therapy many times already at that point, trying to battle depression, anxiety, heal wounds like that. And then all of a sudden I was like, I really want to do more. There has to be more. And I started an e-commerce company, which was originally a monthly subscription in my mind. But the thing is that from that experience of wanting to do more and recognizing that I wanted to impact people's lives, I had one of the bracelets that I sold as part of that business had the saying, when it's dark, look for stars. When it's raining, look for rainbows.
Oh,
And so when you talk about the pinprick of light,
oh,
I
oh.
automatically think about when it's dark, look for stars. And I wore that bracelet after he passed to remind myself of that. And I definitely had that experience when I was like, well, I started a gratitude practice because I said, okay, how do I look for those stars, right? How do I do this? Because
Right.
I've spent so much of my life dwelling on everything that was wrong and everything that was missing and all the ways that I wasn't getting the love that I craved from, now I understand, from my parents in the way that I needed it. And so it was like starting that gratitude practice taught me that skill of, hey, when I went for my run today, that lake and those trees, like that looks so magnificent. And when I looked at my daughter in his face today, I saw like her eyes light up with joy from just the smallest of things, right? Like playing with the dog or the butterfly, or and it just helped me pay attention rather than just going through the motions. And so I guess so much of what you're saying is resonating, and I think it is about rewiring our brains to look for the good, to look for it intentionally, because whatever we look for we will find, right?
Right. And gosh, thank you for sharing all of that. So beautiful. And I love the similarity, right? Looking for the stars or the little pinpricks of light. And one thing that I just wanted to add that was so beautiful, and it's so true what you were saying, is looking for the good. Sometimes when I was really depressed, and I don't know about you, that was even too hard. And so sometimes what I like to say to people is there something that just sparkles a little? Is there something
Yeah.
that, you know what I mean? Like, depending on where we are on our journey, right?
Yeah.
And I like sparkle too because it's also like light, but it's just like it's even a little bit less. So, it could even just be like you were saying, right? That butterfly flitted past us. But I really appreciate so much the similarities in our journey. And it makes me also want to say, like, what came for me from that practice of looking for love, looking for pinpricks of light, looking for tiniest moments that it was almost like I could step into that tiny moment of light to get me to the next tiny moment of light and living. Once I practiced that for a long enough time, something happened where I sort of popped out of all of that me, and I say that with all lovingness to my younger self, but it was a very self-conscious, self-centered way of being in the world. But there was something where I kind of popped out of that because all of that practice of looking for those moments of light, what I saw when I popped out was exactly, I think, what we're pointing to. A lot of people are in the dark, more people, I think, than we'll ever know, right? Because it hasn't been something that I think more and more now it's okay to talk about. People are starting to really be able to be more vulnerable and open, but still, there's this big focus as we started on the beginning of this talk, which is there is a big focus on, be happy, be joyful. And
Mm.
and sometimes what I think that did to me is I only presented that side to people. For years,
Mm.
no one had any idea. what was going on for me. Maybe for you too, I don't know.
When you talk about darkness like that, I know there was for me, there was a whole lot of, I definitely can't tell people that I'm like thinking like this, because what it does is like the message out there is if you tell people that you're thinking like this, they're going to hospitalize you,
Exactly.
right? And they're going to call the police and all this stuff, right?
Exactly.
So, yeah, you don't talk about thinking like that because there's a lot of unwanted interventions that might happen.
I mean, what a great point, Diana. I love that. And again, I guess it's one of the reasons for me that it became really important practice for myself to seek and create pinpricks of light for myself. But even more so, what happened, and I think what you were holding in your hand earlier is a result of that, it became very important for me to offer tiny moments of light to people in whatever form. I mean, it's not just that I look around and see, oh, who might be in the dark. It's just that I know a lot of people might be. And even if you're not in the dark, it feels really good to be in the light. So it's
Mhm.
a win-win that way. And I realized I was always that first recipient. You can only imagine how much fun is it to secretly take those screenshots while you were talking to Brendan and to know how important that might be to someone and to collect them. And it's a joy activity to be planning something, even the tiniest of surprises for someone.
So, what I love about what you said, right, is that rather than expect people to kind of, or encourage people to talk more about their darkness, because it is very vulnerable and scary because of the potential repercussions that come with that. Similar to how I was feeling, like if I share this, this might come with interventions that I am not willing or ready or prepared to, face. That is not what I'm hoping for. What I really needed, and is what you are now saying to offer people, is the light, right? To offer people to feel seen and to offer them that encouraging word about how special they are. And so I love that, because what you're saying is something that my therapist actually said once, and that's that actually the majority of people at one point or another walked in the darkness. And so if you walk assuming that there are people out there that need to be shown the light, and you look for it and you shine it for them, you're actually going to make a greater impact than you may ever know, right?
And what I love about that, what you just said, something dropped in for me, which is certainly true for me, and I'm guessing for most people. Sometimes within the course of a day, I go through big dips and big highs. And I think it isn't even so much that it's like, oh, well, back then I was depressed, and now look at me. That is not what it
Right.
is. And so I love what you said, because what happens for me is that in the practice of looking to see, what I could reflect to somebody, what could I see that's beautiful in them? What could I see that is the sparkle in them, right? That looking at people as sparkles. And when I look for that, and when I'm reflected to them, it's creating a rewiring in me in the moment. So it's always that twofer, right? Like it's lovely. And I still do spend a lot of time going around for myself, like, oh, what would make me happy right now? What would feel good? I feel like the impact is so much more powerful when I'm looking at other people to find those sparkles, because then there's twice as much joy, right? I
Yeah.
mean, simple math.
Yeah. As we're talking and I'm thinking about what are some things that maybe people that are struggling with this might be thinking, and I know this is something that I would probably have thought at a different time. It's like, well, we're not saying one person giving you the validation is going to change your world, because going through this process definitely taught me that I looked externally for validation to feel seen, to feel loved, and then learning that actually I needed to learn to see myself first before I was ever able to accept somebody else's ability to see me. It was like the more validation I got externally, it felt like it was never enough because I would reject it and I wouldn't believe it. But what it does provide is to be light in somebody's life and allowing them to feel like that person is a person that sees them. And therefore, maybe when they do need someone to pick them up or to shine some light, they know that you're a person that can do that. And it feels less alone, feels less isolated. It feels less difficult to reach out because you've made yourself a safer person, I guess.
I love that. That's so beautiful. And I really appreciate what you're saying because me too, right? I thought I was looking for external love, same thing, parents, childhood, blah, 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 right? All of that. But it's actually not. It's right. We need it. But I think that what you're saying is so important. And I think there are a couple other, like if it was a diamond, there'd be a couple other facets to it. Now, one of which, again, I'm going to go back to sometimes a singular moment of light or love or someone connecting to us and seeing us in a beautiful way, sometimes that can be enough just to get us to the next moment. And I know in my experience, I need that a lot, right? Because it can feel like I am just sinking into that pit of darkness and depression. And instead of sinking, at least it's like a tiny uplift. Even if it's for a moment, it gets me to the next one. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is that I think it's not as clear as I'm seeing the light in you, and so I'm gifting you. I think it's way more complex than that. I think when I'm seeing the light in you, we all know the word projection, right? That it's like really, without knowing it, I'm acknowledging that goodness in me. And we can even make that a little bit more conscious rather than just a subconscious thing, right? By understanding, like, right, how I'm seeing the world is who I am. There's not,
Mm.
not to be too, Buddhist or woo woo, but it's like we are all one. And so to come from that place, and then I guess the third part is why I'm always encouraging. I mean, my book, Say It Now, came from going to memorials and funerals and hearing people say all that amazing stuff, all that affirmation, all those stories, oh, that person, oh, they changed my life. And that idea of say it now, the more we practice that, the more we learn the joy of love. It's important in the moment for that specific person in front of us, but in a much bigger way, it's like a rewiring of us. It's a rewiring for the other person. It's a rewiring of the way that most of us have been brought up, which is what's wrong? What do you need to buy to fix it? What's wrong? Oh, sorry, there's nothing that's going to fix that. That's just you. That's how I think after a while, I was just like, oh, I'm just defective, something I was born wrong or whatever. It changes that thinking to that's not even relevant. It's just where love is here.
Mm. As you talk about like what's wrong, how do I fix it? I think about one of the moments for me that made a difference, right, is when I really started to focus on how much I had to be grateful for. The fact that I could see my daughter's face, that I could hear her laughter and her giggling, that I could go on a run, that my body was able to go on that run while I could have been instead laying on a hospital bed, right? Looking for all these things that I had to be grateful for. I also started to notice nature in a different way, or maybe just spend a little bit more time kind of dwelling on it, like observing all the details of it. And I started to say this, like, nature is God's canvas and that's his artwork. And after a while, I don't know if I heard it somewhere or when I started to really embrace this, because I probably had heard it before, but I didn't necessarily believe it, is the idea that God made the universe, all the animals and all the flowers and all this beauty, and he still decided that the world needed one of you too, right? And
Oh,
so it was like, there was so many things about me that I would just think about like what's wrong with them. Like, I'm clumsy or I'm forgetful. Or my sister used to call me absent-minded. So that sounds just like a fancy word for airheaded or something. And so it was like, I had these flaws, right? And I remember one of the great things that made me feel so loved by Juan was that he looked at my flaws and he just loved them. And he just thought that they were so endearing, right? And so that connected me back to, you know what? These are unique aspects of me that if you took them away, it's almost like I would be a totally different person, because the reason I'm such a go with the flow, laugh it off kind of a person is because I have these other characteristics that I've learned to kind of like work with in life. And so it's like you just can't have you if you take out what you perceive to be bad, right? Like you can't be the same person without any flaws or without any quirks. Think about how I used to, and I have a podcast now where all I do is talk, but I used to say, I'm very verbose or very wordy, stuff like that, that are things that I always looked at, okay, I need to keep working on myself, fixing myself, as opposed to, I just want to like gain some skills. There's a different feeling that comes with feeling flawed versus feeling a desire to grow in certain areas. And the other thing that tying it back to Juan is that made me feel so loved is what you were talking about before, where it feels so good, right? You said plan a surprise. Well, Juan was like the best at planning surprises. And I kind of took that experience to heart. This is like my love language, right? Like surprises and or like the thing that made me feel so like thoughtfulness maybe is the thing. Like anytime that a lot of thought goes into showing someone, hey, you're really special to me for these reasons, it really touches me in a big way. I think that's probably the case for probably anybody. Maybe for someone it's a thoughtful meal versus someone it's a thoughtful word. My love language is also words of affirmation. So he would plan the surprise trip to Puerto Rico for my birthday, or he would plan the surprise party or the scavenger hunt. These were little surprises, but the surprises, I was thinking about you and you didn't know, and I put this together for you because you were on my mind because you're special to me, right?
Yes, 1,000 times over, right? That's what I would shout from a rooftop. I know I've said this to you before, that I'm really out to reinvent the way people see the word gift, because people really first go to tangible something. And to me, and say it now, that's what say it now is, it's full of creative gifts to do exactly what you say. And I think to me, what you articulated so well is that part of it, it's super fun to have a scavenger hunt, no doubt. But there is that added layer that we all know, wow, he was thinking about me for a long time and put a lot of time and effort and energy and love into this. And I think, we feel that, as opposed to, and there's nothing wrong with people running out to a store to buy something at the last minute. However, I think we feel that too. It's worse when people are just like, oh, I have to get a gift. I have to get a gift.
I have to.
Right? But if we think about the word gift as an energetic offering to someone of some thoughtfulness or some way of seeing them, appreciating them, acknowledging them, then we start to look at the world in a whole different way, right? We start to look at, oh, I just heard a Bruce Springsteen song that reminds me of my friend from 8th grade. I'm going to make her an audio recording with that song in the background and tell her how much I loved growing up with her. That is a gift.
It's so interesting that you mentioned that. One of the very first things that Juan did that made me cry was just, he called me during a very tough moment that I was having with my family, and I couldn't pick it up. And then I got a voicemail and I excused myself and I left the room and I went to listen to it. And it was one of my favorite songs that I had mentioned get me through difficult moments. And he left it recorded on my voicemail. And it was actually it was Streets of Philadelphia.
Oh, oh, I love Juan. I love Juan. I just, what a, we don't, I certainly don't understand the mystery of life or how things work, but I can tell you, like, I've been talking a lot about the legacy effect, which is a term I just coined recently, which has to do with, I never met Juan. I never crossed paths with this person, but I have heard so many things that make me love him and that have impacted me.
Oh.
And right, like, and I think it's one of the, again, it's like one of those, it's akin to a gratitude practice, right? And it's akin to scanning the world for the good, but it's like I'm always scanning the world for those kinds of things because I like to think that people's energy stays. So this amazing person that I never got to meet in physical form is changing my life. When you said earlier, I can't remember exactly how you said it, but I thought of a quote that my spiritual teacher uses, which is, "We will do for the love of others what we won't do for ourselves." And I think that when you told me the story about wanting to carry on one's love of life, when you wanted to make sure your daughter grew up with that, I think that's one of those ways that we do for someone else what we can't in the moment do for ourselves, but then we catch up to, or it catches up to us, right? Like,
Yeah.
but it's again, it's why I'm such a fan of creative gift giving that we're talking about, the kinds of gifts where you show people how much they loved they are, because it's like, maybe we can't yet feel that, but eventually I think it comes home to roost.
So true. And honestly, there was a time where I wish he had met this version because I was like, I couldn't understand why I had to take that to motivate the change. And I guess it's like you said, we'll do for others, what we won't do for ourselves. And also, I hate to put it this way, but it was almost like he made it so that I didn't have to.
Yeah, no, I get that. I mean, I get that. Yeah. And again, I guess I always really love to point to, this world is so vast. It's so mysterious. There's so much that we don't know. And for me, I've always chosen to believe that relationships go on after someone passes physically. It's just my own personal belief, and people could, maybe not believe that or whatever, but I've personally seen huge shifts in my own relationships with people who passed away decades ago, where we can have conversations, we can talk to them, whether it's quote unquote real or not real, I don't really care, but I think it adds to the love. So I like to think that there's some Juan somewhere just like grinning right now, feeling the beauty of this Diana, right? Who's sitting here today.
Yeah. Grief is definitely almost like it's just really hard to understand unless you actually experience it. Because so much of grief is just like your body, your mind, your soul, everything trying to make sense of the vacant hole that is left in your life from that person. And it's like so many emotions, so many thoughts, so many like trying to make sense. And you experience all of them through grief. You experience love and anger and frustration and regret and sadness and longing and just gratitude. And it's just like, I think grief probably allows you to experience maybe every human emotion and sometimes all in the same 5 minutes.
Wow.
Right.
Yes.
And so I
Wow.
think that that's just a very powerful experience. And it makes sense that we would, have to come to like, how do I make sense of all this? And how do I make sense of the emotions that I feel? And how do I make sense of this longing. And so when you said, I don't even care, it makes, it does make sense that it's like, you know what, this is how I can be with this,
Yeah.
right?
Yes, right. It's a self-care. It's a self-care. And I think what you're touching on is super important. For one thing, as far as I can tell, grief is like everyone experiences it in different ways, in different forms. They've proven that there's not stages of grief. But the thing is, how do we care for ourselves in the midst of it? Which I think is the question every day, always, right? How do we care for ourselves in the disappointment, in the loss? How do we care for ourselves in the highs when things are really good, when we get what we want, and then we don't know what's next? I mean, there's always that being human is many, 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 many aspects, right? Many facets. And so, yeah, not that the way that I see things is at all the way that anyone else should see them, but I think we do all share, we share tools, we share practices, we have conversations like this because it's like, well, I don't know, this helped me, right? Maybe a piece of it
Yeah.
will help you. That's always, I think, the hope is that,
Yeah,
yeah.
for sure. What you were saying is it's not phases, right? We were talking about the darkness of grief, right? And I think one of the things about that I thought of before when you said it was it's not that necessarily the glimmers of light is like looking for the good necessarily. It's like you can still be in that depth of grief. And the glimmer is really almost like it's not the opposite, right? It's not like the opposite of grief or sadness. It's kind of like I can hold on to this experience and feel, maybe gratitude is the right word. I'm such a words person. I love to get like the exact right word. Words don't come close to explaining feelings, but I always feel like there is something to be said for the word that gets closer to the emotion. There's a difference, right? And it's, I don't know if it's gratitude. It's almost like, I don't know if it's appreciation, but there's another feeling that is not the opposite, that allows for connection on a deeper level. And we're talking about here, like what works for us. I think what beliefs we hold through these moments is worth sharing. There are so many different ways that people try to process these things, and what works for one may not work for another. And I think for me as a Christian, I do believe that Juan's soul, Juan's spirit will be there when I'm reunited with my maker, right? Like I will be reunited with God at some point, and his spirit, his soul will be there. It's not like he just disappeared. I don't know about whether Juan is here though. And biblically speaking, I think there are teachers that will say that the signs that I feel are from him can only be delivered by God and not him. And maybe I can see that, but there are definitely ways that it's communicated to me that I'm on the right path, or I'm getting signs that I asked for. So it's coming from someone, right? And whether that's God, because he knows that Juan holds a special place in my heart, or it's Juan himself, I don't know. Biblically speaking, I know it says that he's going to be in heaven. And I heard somewhere, Amanda Klutz, I think, said this, and I don't know, maybe she heard it somewhere else. What if heaven is just another dimension right where we are? And we're actually just like one dimension away from our loved ones. And yes, we can't see them and we can't necessarily be in the same place, but what if they're just right there?
Right. I love that. And, language is so hard around any of this and all of this. But also, when we talk about someone's spirit, we could mean one thing has sort of that religious biblical, but we could also say his spirit is alive for sure, in the sense of how do I get a sense of who he is when you're talking about him?
The impact of his spirit on me and everyone that knew him or getting to know him through his stories, I think the impact of his spirit is definitely, a kind of, I think what you're saying is like a living, breathing thing.
Yes. I mean, again, I use the word legacy, right? To me, that is legacy, the impact that we leave.
Yeah. So, interestingly, I just had a conversation about legacy like yesterday because I was reflecting on this. I thought it was so interesting. So recently, I started to really be intentional about reconnecting with joy. One of the things that I do to connect with joy is I will listen to specific music that I know makes my body move in a joyful way. And I recognize these songs don't do that for other people.
Yeah.
But when I said, you know what I need? I need to pick me up. It just hit me and it dawned on me subtly like, I am playing this song of an artist that has no idea that I am playing this song for the joy of my life, for me to feel a certain way that is now going to impact the way I show up with everybody that I see after this. And every time that I want to feel this way and connect with that emotion and have that memory, I play this song. And this artist will at some point leave this earth and have no idea that it impacted my life in this way. And by the way, I'm not the only one. Maybe for someone else, this is actually a really sad song. Or maybe for someone else, this song reminds them of a loved one, whatever it is, right? And I just was like, wow, there's such beauty in that. But then I had a second thought right after that. That was everyone has the opportunity to leave that kind of legacy in whatever they do. The same applies to books and the same applies to like the different technological advances and like all these ripple effects of these legacies that people leave in doing what they love and having it manifest in ways that will carry on that you will never know about, right? And just even Brendan's work, I thought how he didn't know for the whole, what is it, like 4 years before I got the chance to actually tell him. It was like there's so many lives that his work touches, and the same applies to everyone. If you're doing it from the heart and you're doing it from a passionate place, there's so many ways that what your art is. Like your art is different for everyone, and whatever your art is can live on. And what you do is like you almost pick up on that art of that person, right? And what things that we don't think about as art, right?
I love that. And everything you're saying is so beautiful. And you probably know what I'm going to say, which is please write that letter. Please write that letter to that artist, write that letter to that author, write that letter. One of my favorite things is sending gratitude letters to people's moms who, a famous poet has touched my life, or, my best friend. Because when we're talking about the impact that people have on us, there's a whole lineage of gratitude. Yeah. I've written a lot of letters to a lot of people that I bet they never got there. I've sent them to people's managers, and who knows if they get there or not. And I've gotten a lot of responses back. I've become friends with authors and poets and a lot of people. But more importantly, it's going to go back to our joy practice, right? More importantly is who do I become in the process, right? So when I hear that song and I feel good, that is a great moment. When I hear that song and I feel good and I notice I feel good, that's another joy. When I hear that song and I feel good and I know I feel good and I'm grateful to the person who provided it and I write to them, then we're talking about a whole different anchoring in and rewiring of our system, right? Because it's like, I heard Rick Hanson, who wrote Buddha's Brain, he said that it takes, I think he said 17 seconds for something positive to stick in us. So when we're doing that kind of process, writing a letter of gratitude, for instance, to someone, we're anchoring that into our bodies in a different way. So, and again, who knows? We all think, oh, that person, he's famous. He doesn't need a letter from me. I've talked to so many famous people who got a letter and like, wow, that never happens anymore. People never send because so many people think, oh, well, they know, everybody's told them,
Yeah. So yeah, that's true. It's so interesting that we do think like everybody's already told them they don't need to hear mine. Yeah. But I'm also hearing in what you're saying is like, it reminds me of my thing for cards. I've always loved, maybe that's why it came with a card when you sent it, maybe that's why it left an imprint on me. I will never just sign a card with my name and not write something. I do take the time to carefully pick out the card that I want, but then I also feel like this was written by someone else entirely for someone else. And while I can see the sentiment and feel it for this person, it's different from saying it in my own words. And so I take the time to write what I feel, and maybe that's because I'm a words person, but I want the person to know what comes from me, from my heart, from my sentiment. And then I also appreciate it so much when someone takes the time to write me what they feel in their words from their heart. And it's interesting that you said write cards to moms, because Juan's mom definitely got a card from me on Mother's Day. Not just his mom, his aunt too, because his aunt raised him from the time he was 11 or 12 on, thanking them for Juan. Because you're so right about that. Like, this person would not even be born or be who they became or get to that point. Because for the first 18 years or more of your life, your mom is the person that is kind of responsible for rearing you in whatever direction, in whatever way. And for as much as we all have, I think, probably some childhood trauma due to their mistakes, it's still, even just the fact that they at some level chose to bring you into the world, right? Like, you wouldn't even be here. And so I think there's gratitude for that. And that also brings me to birthdays. Like, there's so many people that aren't celebrating their birthdays, and I think it's so important to celebrate birthdays. I always said, like, no, this is your birthday, and if not for the day you were born, I wouldn't be blessed with your presence in my life. And so I think birthdays are so important because they're a celebration. It's the one day we celebrate that, you know, this many years ago, you came to the world. And because of that, I get to experience your presence, your uniqueness, what makes you you, your love, your light, talent, whatever it is, I would have never been able to if you weren't born. And I think when we don't celebrate our birthdays, we are sending a message that maybe subconsciously that it wasn't a big deal. And it's such a miracle that we're even here as the unique mixture of all our DNA and X and Y chromosomes that made us exactly who we became. I think that's a miracle. And so it's worth celebrating.
I love that. And it makes me think again of like one of my fun gifts that I love to do is fake birthday. So I'm getting together, let's say I'm getting together with my friend Trisha, which I did do it for her. I'm getting together with Trisha just to have dinner, and I bring her a birthday card and I bring her a, you know, an I love you gift and some fun, and I let me buy you dinner because I'm celebrating you. It's rethinking, rebooting ourselves.
What did you call it? I think
Called it a fake. I just called it fake birthday.
birthday. Oh.
I could probably come up with something more inventive, but I'm just like, oh, we're celebrating your fake birthday, or maybe just call it a celebrating you day or whatever.
Yeah.
But I think it's again back to the idea of surprise, right? And how much Brendan always says our brains love novelty. So it's like when it's our birthday, it's fabulous to be celebrated. It's wonderful when people do things. And when we show up to have an everyday dinner with someone on a Tuesday night and they show up with joy and love and appreciation and celebration, and I made you a love list because I'm celebrating, it's like a whole different level of joy, right?
Yeah.
Just we could also probably talk for an hour about birthdays because birthdays are hard for people for a million reasons. So just to put that out there, that it's like to rejigger the way that we see things, I think is really important. Again, like any day can be someone's birthday if we're grateful that they were born.
Yeah. Well, any day is a good day to celebrate that they were born.
Yeah. I do a similar, like a fake vacation. A friend and I wish we could be in Paris, and we love Paris, and we talk about Paris. And it's like, you could go to, there's a place here in San Francisco called the French Cafe, right? You can go to the French Cafe and you could bring some music that's French, and you could speak a little French just to be funny, to kind of remember. Because I think for me, a big part of my depression was that life didn't look like or feel like how I thought it was supposed to. And I think a
Mm.
big part of my joy is understanding that I have agency. I may not
Hmm.
have the money at this moment to get a ticket for me and my friend to go to Paris, but I do have the agency to create something that feels I could dress like I would in Paris and do the best I can to have that experience.
Oh my God, what you just shared with me reminds me of a story that Jim Quick tells that made a real impact on me. Jim Quick talks about this woman that was going through a terminal illness, and she only had very limited amounts of time to live. And they were trying to help her through that experience because there was nothing else that they could do physically. And she said, well, you don't understand. All I want is to have the ability to be there for when my kids graduate, for when they get married, for when they have their first heartbreak, all these major life events that she was going to now no longer be able to be at. You know, she stopped talking about all the things that she wasn't going to get, and she started to ask, how can you do that? How can you have that experience? And she figured it out. So, what she ended up doing is that she had written like hundreds of letters to her kids, and they were all labeled for different occasions. And it was for your first day at work or for your, and she found a way to be there for them on those moments. And she really like imagined what that was like and then wrote from the heart what she would want them to know. And it's just so powerful because it's not what I wanted, it's not what I envisioned or what
Yes.
I thought it was going to be like, but I can still choose to, create the feeling that I want within this new context. And maybe it's even better, but it's definitely better than not doing it, right? Than not taking agency and finding the way, right?
Diana, that was gorgeous. I love that so much, right? And I think that is one of the secrets of life. Like things happen,
Mm.
life does not look like what we think or what we want or what we hope. It's just the nature of life. And yet, and I don't mean to sound cliche because it does sound kind of cliche, like, well, make the most of it. Well, make lemonade from lemons. It's not necessarily that, but I do think that if it's raining and I've got a picnic planned with my beau, nothing is going to change that it's raining. No amount of feeling distressed or upset or crying. And I've seen that. I spent my entire childhood doing that, just feeling disappointed with myself and the world. It's like at some point, we do just learn to, like, what do I do with this? What do I do with this rain? I think that was one of the biggest things I learned. What a huge gift to be with someone and to say, like, hey, let's take off our shoes and feel the mud on our feet together and giggle. It's such a gift when someone else can do that for us to jumpstart something.
Yeah. Reminded me of the flat tire we got on our way to our wedding reception. It was so nice to be alongside someone that could laugh about it and make jokes about it and be totally fine with, okay, so we got a flat on in the limo. Now we're gonna drive in a Civic or whatever.
Wow.
So like you would think that that was like this big thing that would make it disappointing, but it was like we were just happy. I know I was just happy to be married to the love of my life, right? Like who cares? This is funny. This is fun. He was so good at laughter. He just found the laughter and everything. And I want to be careful not to say that the goal is not to experience sorrow, not to
Yeah.
experience disappointment, not to experience frustration, because actually that was the hardest part of my whole journey was realizing, oh, wait a minute. The goal is not to avoid all of these terrible feelings. That's actually only making things harder and worse. I'm avoiding feeling the negative feelings. And what I realized is once I started to allow myself to feel them so that I could move through them, I actually felt much better.
I'm so glad you said that because I was just about to also say Because that is it's so important, right? To always say that. Like part of it is always allowing ourselves to have how we feel. And my own spiritual teacher has taught me the joy of allowing all of those things. Like, so how do I want to express my despair, my disappointment, or I think maybe part of it, I mean, unfortunately, we'll have to have this conversation another time, but maybe part of it is that, I mean, the word depression really does come from not expressing. And so it's not so much what we're expressing, but the act of expressing is life affirming. And it's right. And again, that's a much bigger conversation, but I'm just glad that you pointed to, yeah, like let ourselves have it all. And then also when it's appropriate, when we feel like we can, to find that laughing at the flat tire.
Yeah.
It's time and when we can.
Yeah, because part of why I was avoiding all the negative feelings was I thought it would last forever. Like what if I can't get out of there after I start to experience, and it does flow through us, and we are able to transition into a moment where we can allow more joy in. And so it's just about, okay, I see that this is frustrating. I see that sadness is here with me now. And then when I'm ready to experience laughter, joy, whatever you want to connect with, like to allow the room for that too. Because, and I've mentioned this on the podcast, and I think I probably mentioned it with you too. It just resonates so much with me. The visual of a pendulum swinging back and forth, right? It's that energetic bandwidth that we allow ourselves to have is just as far into our sadness and our sorrow and our darkness that we can go is only the breadth and width that we are going to allow ourselves to experience joy and happiness and love. And so it's not being afraid of one side, because without it, we can't have the other.
I love that. And sometimes it just goes all the way around really fast. Like, I love when you were talking about that, because it's like if our sadness is over here and our joy is over here. It is true. Sometimes it happens in seconds, unexpectedly. Yeah. You mentioned that earlier today, and it's so beautiful. I could talk to you forever. I'm sad as our time has come.
This has been great. Yeah, this has been great. Thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation. I think it's so meaningful and valuable for people to hear about. What are some ways that they can celebrate more? What are some ways that they can find those pricks of light, and to feel seen and heard for those that are experiencing burnout or depression or darkness or transition or grief. And so I just think that people look at someone like you that has all the colorfulness in not just your appearance, but in your energy that you exude, and they think, how do I have more of that? When they think it's an identity that's missing, like I'm not that person. And to hear how intentional you are and what the ways that you've experienced your own sorrow and your own grief and your own darkness, I think it's just really powerful. So thank you so much for your vulnerability. Thank you so much for sharing your joy with us today. For those that do want to work with you or connect with Joy more or read your book, what are some ways that people might find you, connect with you? Maybe they want to share their own aha moments with you about what you shared today.
Oh, that's lovely. I would love that. My book is called Say It Now, and it's available at bookstores and online. My company is called Simply Celebrate, and that's also where I am on social media. So I would love it if people connect with me on social media at Simply Celebrate, or Sherry at simplyscelebrate.net.
Thank you so much, Sherry. Such a pleasure. Let's do it again and close the loop on those additional conversations.
I love that. I know we have so many more places to go. So thank you. What a wonderful, wonderful time.
Thanks so much. Thank you for tuning into today's episode of Courage and Purpose. I hope today's insights inspired you to take bold action and align your life and career with what truly matters to you. If you're ready to dive deeper, I invite you to download my free Action Indicator Assessment, a powerful tool to help you uncover what's holding you back and take the next step towards clarity and confidence. Just visit www.lifeonpurpose.coach/action indicator to get started today. If you found value in today's episode, Please subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with someone who could use a little extra courage on their journey. Until next time, stay true to your purpose, lead with courage, and keep thriving. I'll see you in the next episode.